Hi candidates, welcome to another session of Manifested Online Classes. In this session, I want us to look on subtopic number 7 of topic 1, and the topic is on government grant. As far as this topic is concerned, we are going to look on various issues relating to the government grant. One, we are going to define what is a government grant, and also the examples of government grant. What are criteria or which criteria must be met for a government grant to be recognized by an entity, and also the presentation of the same, how the government grant should be presented in the financial statement, in the income statement, and the statement of financial position, and equally the disclosure requirements, which information need to be disclosed by the company as far as the government grant are concerned, and also in accordance with the International Accounting Standard number 20. So to start with, we need to define what is a government grant, and basically this refers to any form of a financial assistance, which can either be in form of cash, which can either be in form of provision of maybe goods or services by a government entity to an entity, or maybe to an organization or even an individual, to encourage a certain activity which is undertaken by that individual or that particular organization, or to achieve a specific defined what objective. So therefore you can say that government grant is any form of a financial assistance, any form of financial assistance by a government entity, So in this case, when we talk about a government entity, we are talking of something like a parastatal, something like the county government, the central government. All those are good examples of government what? Entity. By a government entity to an individual, or an entity, to an individual or entity, to encourage a specific activity, automatically undertaken by that individual or that particular what? Entity, or to achieve defined objective, objectives, or objective or what? Objective. So that is the definition of what we refer as a government grant. Any form of financial assistance from the government which is given to an individual or an entity or even an organization to encourage a certain activity which is undertaken by that particular organization or that individual, or to achieve as a defined objective. For example, an organization can receive a government grant to undertake a project which by the end of the day will be benefiting the society. So that assistance, that financial assistance received by such an organization from the government is a form of government grant. Now, these particular government grants should be accounted for, or in other terms should be presented in the financial statement of an organization in accordance with the International Accounting Standard number 20. So, but before we look on the accounting aspect, so maybe first of all we can look on the examples of government grant. So let's say that a government grant include the following. Number one, the government grant can be in form of cash payment, can be in form of a cash what? Payment. So this whereby an individual or even an organization will receive a government grant which is in form of what? Cash. Maybe for that organization, for that individual to undertake a certain activity which by the end of the day we are saying will benefit now the society, or basically the members of the public. Government grant can also take the form of what refers as tax incentives. Tax incentives can also take the form of what? Of subsidies. So the government can reduce the price, or in other terms, the government can subsidize the prices of some of the product or maybe the services which are used by such an organization. And also the government grant can also take the form of what? Can also take the form of provision of goods or services, provision of goods or services by a government entity. By a government what? Entity. So therefore, the government grant can take any of this particular what? A form. It can be in form of cash payment, whereby an organization is receiving a government grant in form of what? A cash. It can also be in terms of what? A tax incentive. This whereby, for example, the company may not be required to pay tax to the government for a given period of time. It can also be in form of subsidy, whereby the government will be subsidizing, in other terms, a part of the price of some of the product which are used by the company will be paid by the government, or the government may supply some goods or even services to an organization free of what? Free of charge. So therefore, those are good examples of the government grant. So then from there, we can look on the criteria for recognition of a government grant. Criteria for recognition of government grant. Now, for government grant to be recognized, and basically we're going to look on how a government grant is recognized in the financial statement of the company. For a government grant to be recognized, then two conditions must be met. One of the conditions is that the government grant must have been received, or has been received. We can say must be received. Must be what? Received. So basically what that means is that an organization cannot go ahead, or maybe an entity cannot go ahead, recognize a government grant which is not yet received. So the government grant, for it to be recognized in the books of account, in the financial statement of the company, that government grant must have been what? Received. And two is that an organization can only recognize that government grant if the conditions which are attached to that particular grant are likely to be fulfilled. It is important for me to mention this, that for any organization to receive any form of government grant, any form of assistance from the government, then that is based on fulfillment of certain conditions. That organization will be given certain conditions, and it can, or that organization, once it is able to fulfill those particular conditions, that is the only time it can be able to do what? To receive such a government grant. And therefore we say the entity will meet the conditions set for the government grant. So if the entity will meet the conditions which have been met by the government, then the entity should then proceed and do what? Recognize that particular government grant. So therefore, we have those as the two conditions or the criteria which must be fulfilled for a government grant to be recognized. The cash or the government grant must have been received, and two, the entity will meet the conditions which have been set for the government what? A grant. Then from there, we can proceed and look on the presentation of government grant in the financial statements. Financial statement of an entity. So how is this government grant recognized, or in other terms, recorded in the financial statement of what? Of an entity. Number one is that, well, first of all, we can look on how this government grant is presented, is recorded in the statement of financial position. A statement of financial position. Now, once an organization or an entity receives a government grant, this particular government grant will be recognized as a liability. As what? As a liability until now the amount has been fully spent. So we can say that the government grant, a government grant is recognized as a liability, in an entity's statement of financial position. So what that means is that once an entity receives a government grant, assuming an entity has received a government grant of 200 million, so the accounting entries, or in terms of how that government grant which has been received is accounted for, the organization, number one, will debit the bank account. Remember, this is money which has been received. So the entity will debit the bank account with the amount of money which has been received, assuming it's 200 million, and then credit an account which is called government grant, an amount of 200 million. So, and therefore this particular amount of 200 million in the statement of financial position, it will be recorded there as a liability. It will be recorded there as a liability because this particular amount has been received to maybe undertake a project by this particular organization, which by the end of the day will be what? Will benefit the community, will benefit the society. So this money does not belong to the organization. The organization is receiving this money basically to be able to do what? To undertake, for example, such a project, which then we are saying by the end of the day will do what? Will benefit the organization. So therefore this should not be recognized directly as an income, because if it's just the money which is given to an organization, the organization is not required to undertake a project, then the organization should just go ahead and recognize that as what? As an income. So once it is recognized as a liability, then we say that this amount then will have to be amortized over the period of time the company expect to complete that project. If an organization, for example, has received 200 million and the organization expects now to undertake a project which by the end of the day we are saying will benefit the community, and the organization expect to complete that project within the next 4 years, then we say that this amount should be amortized over the next 4 years, or in other terms we say it is recognized on a systematic basis to match the cost now to be incurred, and the amount now to be recognized, also the amount to be amortized in each financial year then should be recognized in the income statement as what? As an income, So therefore, in this case, we can look on the presentation of the government grant in the statement of in the income statement, number 2 here, income statement, and basically here we can say that the government grant, grant is recognized on a systematic basis, to do what? To match with the costs with the related cost, cost. What you mean by this is that if, for example, this company received a government grant of 200 million, and the company received this government grant in order to undertake maybe a certain project, which by the end of the day will benefit the community, and the company expects that it will be able to complete that project in the next 4 years. In the next 4 what? Years. What that means is that this particular amount of 200 million, the government grant which was received, over 200 million, then this one we are saying will be amortized over the next 4 years, the next 4 years, the next 4 years. And once it is amortized over the next 4 years, the government grant which is amortized, number one, a government grant amortized, government grant amortized, amortized, this one is recognized as an income, is recognized as an income, as an income in the income statement, is recognized as an income in the income what? Statement. And any related costs, any related cost which is incurred by the company in terms of undertaking this particular project, then this one will be recognized as an expense still in the income what? Statement, in the income statement. So therefore, that's how the government grant is what? Is presented, is accounted for. Once a government grant is received, debit, bank, credit, an account called government grant, meaning that in the balance sheet, in the statement of financial position, that government grant will be recognized as what? As a liability. And then what we do, it is then recognized on a systematic basis in the income statement to match the related cost, or the cost now to be incurred by the company in terms of undertaking that what? A project. Therefore, you have said that that government grant which will be amortized each year, then you are saying will be recognized as an income in the income statement, and any related cost will be what? Will be recognized in the income statement as what? As an expense. Finally, we can look on the disclosure requirements, what the company need to disclose as far as the government grant is concerned. So let's look on the disclosure requirements. Disclosure requirements for government grant. So these are information to be provided to the users of the financial statements as far as the government grant received in a certain financial year is concerned, or as far as the government grant received by the company is concerned. So the information to be disclosed, one, is the accounting policies adopted by the entity, basically to help the entity in terms of accounting for the government what? Grant. Accounting policies adopted for government grant, including methods of presentation, in a statement of financial position. That is the first information to be disclosed as far as the government grant is concerned. Number two, the company should also disclose those particular conditions which have not been fulfilled at the end of each year. So we talk of unfulfilled conditions. Unfulfilled conditions. Which conditions were not yet fulfilled when the year was coming to an end? And number three, and actually the last one, that is the nature and extent of government grant, nature and extent of government grant recognized in the financial statement, So this is the information which a company need to disclose as far as the government grant is what? Is concerned. So therefore, that's what you need to know as far as the government grant is concerned. And basically you have said that those are some of the issues which are outlined at this standard, that is IS 20, as far as the government grant is concerned. So let me give some assignment as far as this topic is concerned. And I will read some few questions here. You attempt them or you take them as your assignment. So the first question reads, define government grant in accordance with International Accounting Standard number 20. Define government grant in accordance with IS 20. Number two, explain the criteria for recognizing government grant as an income within the financial statement. Explain the criteria for recognizing government grant as an income as an income within the financial statement. And number 3, give 4 examples of government grant. Give 4 examples of government grant. And final number 5, describe the presentation of government grant in the income statement and the statement of financial position. Describe presentation of government grant in the income statement and the statement of financial position. So make sure you attempt those particular questions on that particular subtopic. So basically that is the end. See you in our next session.